We're bringing healthy back. Them other bros don't know about the facts.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Magic of Metabolic Health podcast. My name is Amelia Wood, and I am a food first personal trainer and metabolic health coach. Here at the Magic of Metabolic Health, we are building a village that encompasses every part of who you are. We release guilt and shame and the quest for perfection and show you how self-efficacy and knowing your why are crucial tools in sustainable behavior change and optimizing your metabolic health. So we are here to help you, and we're going to get you there as a village, as a community today. And for episode 12, we have one of the most amazing dietitians I've ever come across with. And I'd like to welcome Michelle Hearn. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a little bio introduction of Michelle. Michelle Hearn is a registered and licensed dietitian with 16 years of experience as a clinical acute care dietitian, lead dietitian in psychiatric care, and outpatient dietitian. Michelle is the author of the books The Dietitian's Dilemma, The Fox Family Food Fight, both available on Amazon, and Michelle co-authored the article Animal-Based Ketogenic Diet Puts Severe Anorexia Nervosa into Multi-Year Remission, a case series, which is published in the Journal of Insulin Resistance. Michelle currently serves as the lead dietitian on the board of the American Diabetes Society. She's an ultra runner with wins in distances ranging from 50 miles to 100 kilometers, and she advocates a low carbohydrate, animal-based diet to reverse insulin resistance and restore for metabolic health. We'll be sure to share all the links once we get through this lovely conversation. So, hello. This is so cool.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we always like to start with on the Magic of Metabolic Health is to get to know our guests and where they come from. So if you don't mind, before we get into all the big adult stuff, where did you grow up? What kind of childhood did you have? Like rural, urban? What kind of food did you grow up with? Just things like that, general environment. I know it's a loaded question, but
a Reader's Digest version. So I'm originally born and raised in Plano, Texas. My health journey actually began when I was 12 years old. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. 5 feet tall, 57 and a half pounds, put into inpatient treatment. So that's where my health journey started. And that's what led me to become a dietitian. I was immediately put on the 24-hour tube feeding system. At that time, the ingredients for tube feeding were corn syrup, soy protein, maltodextrin, canola oil, pretty highly inflammatory ingredients. And I was told, even as a very young person, you don't really recover from an eating disorder. If you become weight restored, then you're going to deal with anxiety, depression, racing thoughts around food. And they weren't wrong. I dealt with that through my early adolescence into adulthood and, followed the standard American diet, really, whole grains, lots of fruits and vegetables, really hoping that would help me heal, and of course that was less than effective.
Yeah. So did you grow up around gardening or farming? Did your family get involved with any kind of DIY, growing your own veggies or anything like that?
No.
Okay. So you went to the grocery store like most.
Yeah. Both of my parents were pretty absent growing up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's just interesting to hear how maybe our childhood eating patterns or access to food influences where we go, the choices we make as adults, whether it's personal or professional, career paths.
Oh, 1,000,000%. I absolutely believe nowadays people are so disconnected from their food. It's amazing. People don't know, have never been to a farm, don't understand the process of raising animals, or, eggs don't just show up, right? Like, how do you raise chickens? How do you raise different crops?
Yeah. I actually had someone tell me once, an old coworker many years ago, I was eating my lunch at my desk and she walks in the door and she goes, You know, Amelia, you always remind me that food comes from the ground. I was sitting there
That's
like,
a good thing, right? Like, yeah, it doesn't just show up on some type of shelf or some random thing.
yeah, I wasn't eating, I don't know, a can of something. I don't know what I was eating, probably a salad or something. And she's like, yeah, I forget, when I go to the grocery store, that's not actually where the food comes from. So, yeah, I agree. I think a lot of folks are disconnected, and I continue to work to be more connected myself with food. So let's continue on the life path of Michelle. So, when did, some people watching this might already know you, they might not. So I know you as a big runner, in addition to being a fabulous dietitian. But again, personal stuff first. How did you get into running?
Yeah, so when I became weight restored when I was 12, before that I played soccer and I loved soccer and I so badly wanted to go back to sports. I loved everything about sports, and so I tried out for the soccer team. Got cut. I tried out for the basketball team and I got cut. And so they're like, well, you're gonna do PE. You'll have to go and do PE. And I just so badly wanted to be on a team. Is there anything else I can try out for? And the my gym teacher was like, well, you could do the running thing. And I didn't even know. I mean, I was very familiar with track and field, but I didn't know what the running thing was. But she was talking about cross country. And where I grew up, you actually, 9th and 10th grade were a separate school than 11th and 12th. So if you did cross country, you actually got to go to the Plano East Senior High. And I was like, oh, that would be so cool to go run with the juniors and the seniors. And so, yeah, so to me, I was like, I would love to do that. And it was, I was weight restored. So I was healthy enough to, I passed a physical to be able to do that. And the first time, I had never done any type of distance running, but the first time I went for a run, I just absolutely fell in love with it. It was amazing. It was, and it also gave me a reason at that point to fuel my body. Like I really, you go from obviously this period of restriction and I was stable at that point. And yeah, absolutely loved it. And, and still do feel very grateful that I, get to do something that I love so much.
Yeah, that's really a gift when we know the first time we try something that it's for us.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Absolutely.
know for some folks it's a longer journey of figuring out what you value, what interests you, all those things.
Yeah. So I wanted to be a dietitian because, I knew nutrition was powerful. I had obviously gone from being very underweight to now I was a normal weight. And it was also my intuition that nutrition could impact my mental health. Like I wanted to not be so anxious. I wanted to feel better. And I also wanted to help other people struggling with eating disorders because I knew how, horrible they could be.
Right. So I considered going to school for nutrition and I didn't. I get certificates through different programs and things to educate myself, but and read books and things. But I'm curious, when you were in school to become a dietitian, what was your biggest aha moment then? You might not agree with whatever you were believing then now, but I'm curious about the transformation, which we'll get to in a second. When you went to school, was there anything that they told you that made you think, oh, wow, I had no idea this was so important, or I wish I had known this earlier in my life, or anything like that?
Um, no, not like that. But I mean, I had things that didn't make sense that I was very conflicted about. Probably the biggest things. I remember going into the room with somebody with type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor saying like, "Okay, we're going to teach them how to eat carbohydrates consistently throughout the day, so they can dose with insulin consistently throughout the day." And I remember asking like, "Oh wait, diabetes, they have high blood sugar, so should we teach them to eat less carbs so they don't need insulin?" And they were like, no, I mean, carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. Everybody needs carbohydrates. And I remember being like, that doesn't really make sense. And then, the fact that the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by processed foods. Even when I was a higher carb, human, a high carb athlete, I I've refused to be a member. You don't have to be a member to be a dietitian because, their number one sponsors at that time were Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, General Mills, all the food companies.
Yeah. Wow, that's alarming. Jeez.
It still
Okay.
is. It's really bad.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff going on still. So you graduated school.
Yes.
Uh, did you get a great job right after you became a dietitian? What was that like? What was your experience with patients?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I was able to work at the place where I did my internship through. But it was hard because, as a clinical dietitian, you're seeing so many patients. And for the most part, my patients weren't really getting better. You'd see someone come in with type 2 diabetes, maybe they had an infection, and within a few months there's an amputation, and now they're going to be on dialysis. And, kind of what doctors would tell us, like, oh, they're just not doing what we tell them to do. They're not following the guidelines. But it seemed like people were really trying, with the knowledge they had, with the resources they had. They were eating vegetables, they were eating fruit, they were eating whole grains. Of course, there's exceptions. But yeah, it was tough. And I also just remember often feeling just overwhelmed. And I know it's even worse now with just so many patients, and you just don't have time. You have to chart. Every patient you have requires a decent amount of chart notes to do. And so you're like, you really don't have enough time to actually have a conversation and make change, and the advice that we were taught to give, this high carbohydrate, whole grain advice, just doesn't really work. So it was pretty terrible, to be honest with you.
That made me think of something. So, can you explain to our viewers the difference between being a registered dietitian and a nutritionist and what your scope of practice is compared to the other?
Yeah, so from what I understand, being a nutritionist doesn't really have any legal definition, meaning you could get a certificate, you could, where a dietitian, you have to get your 4-year degree in a dietetics program, then you have to apply and get it and match and get into an internship. And then after you complete your internship, you have to sit for the RD exam. And I do want to say that most or a lot of nutritionists dash health coaches are probably much better than a lot of registered dietitians when it comes to giving nutrition advice, because they haven't been, brainwashed by the nutrition guidelines that just don't really work. So, but yeah, that's the path to be a dietitian.
Okay. Yeah, I was never into a lot of science stuff in high school, and so I kind of ran screaming in the other direction once I went to college and I did performing arts and things like that. But I was always into health and curious about all these different things. And a number of years back, I remember having a conversation with Joan Iflin, and I was saying, Joan, I really want to help people and I want to help myself and, kind of dive into another career path, but I'm really hesitant because I don't trust the systems, the institutions to teach me things that are, based on good science. And she's like, yeah, you're right. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money, because all you're going to be doing is interrupting your professors and challenging them. And you're not going to get anywhere because they don't have the same knowledge you have, even as someone who's just self-taught, you know. So she said, do certificate programs, pick and choose from reputable organizations that you trust. And so I did. I've taken many courses with the Nutrition Network, and I really value how they teach and the accessibility and things like that. So anyway, I wanted you to kind of define the difference, because for a long time, I thought being a nutritionist was a big deal and you had to do all this schooling and there was all this respect. And that's why I kind of wanted to go to school for something health related, as I thought, well, people aren't going to trust me if I don't have a degree, like a giant degree. And it's interesting that you shared that
Yeah, I mean,
people,
it does give
yeah.
you credibility. I do think having the dietetics degree gives you credibility, because I certainly, have a lot of experience. But unfortunately, when it comes to actual clinical practice, the guidelines are so far behind the science, as you stated, that it doesn't, you're not really helping people heal. I would love to see the dietetics program transform into, catching up with the science. We know we can reverse type 2 diabetes. We know we can help stabilize, every type of mental disorder. We know cardiovascular disease is not caused by elevated LDL in a vacuum, but because you have systems that are profiting off, major food companies and pharmaceutical companies, they're just way behind the science, and they're probably not going to evolve because they're getting sponsored. So yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of a vicious cycle.
indeed.
So going forward into your next aha moment, would it make sense to maybe talk about 2019
Sure.
and what was going on in your life then?
Yeah, so in 2019, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. And so I'd run 2 hours and 54 minutes. At that time, you had to run under 2 hours and 48 minutes. So I was training really hard, putting in a ton of work. And all of a sudden, it just felt like my body wasn't recovering very well. And, I went and had some labs run. Everything was normal. I started just feeling achy. My workouts weren't very good. I reached out to a few friends. I reached out to a sports dietitian, and they all told me I needed more carbohydrates. You have to eat more carbohydrates. And at that time, I was eating about 350 grams of carbohydrates. So already very, very high carbohydrates. And so I was like, all right, let's do it. And as you can imagine, that did not go particularly well. I went from being anxious and, struggling with periods of depression to I had panic attacks. I remember driving to work and I had to pull over because I was like breaking out in a cold sweat. And then like the come to Jesus moment, I was working in acute care at that time, and I covered oncology. We had a young patient pass away. Came home early, fell asleep on the couch in the mid-afternoon, and then woke up at like 2:30 in the morning. And it just felt like my body was on fire. My joints hurt, my legs hurt. I was sweating, and it was like, I don't know what to do. I've done what I was supposed to do. I'm doing everything my nutrition education told me to do. Got my labs run. I've tried, normal stuff, weird stuff. And so at 3 a.m, I drove to 7-Eleven and got like 30 pounds of ice and put in an ice bath and just was crying. And then my wife came in and was like, maybe we should do something different. And I'm like, yeah, I'm done running. At that point, I just thought like, I'm done running. But I intuitively knew all these carbohydrates were not making me feel well. My education had told me I had to have them. And so I was like, well, if I'm not running, maybe I should eat less carbs. And that kind of evolved into like, well, maybe I should try a ketogenic diet. But I was scared. Like, how embarrassing, But my education had told me like, you have to have carbs. Too much fat is bad. But I was so sick. And I think this happens to people. You get to a point where you're like rock bottom. And, I ended up thinking, all right, I'm going to do a ketogenic diet, adopted a full carnivore diet for 30 days. And that changed my life. And that, brought me to where I am today.
Wow. So how did that transformation impact how you practice medicine or dietetics with your patients?
Yeah, well, you can't, once you see it, once, within 30 days, my entire life changed. Like, and this is, I'm not dramatizing this. The first week was an absolute nightmare. I would tell anybody, make sure you drink plenty of fluid, drink electrolytes. I didn't know. I was just kind of winging it. And I was miserable. I was eating so many carbohydrates. To go from a lot to zero was not fun. All kinds of achy, sweaty, terrible, and of course my wife's like, how's that diet going? Oh, it's great. It's great. Right. But after about a week, my muscles stopped hurting. And I was like, well, I'm not running. That must be why. But then I noticed I could go for periods of time without eating and not be anxious. And I was sleeping well, and I was calm for the first time in decades. And my mind wasn't racing, and it was easy, and I felt happy. And, within 3 weeks, my wife said, this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And that led us to, we both worked at institutions. He's a scientist. So we dove into all the clinical trials, every study we could find. And I was angry. I was like, they have all these studies on ketogenic diets. I was never even presented one as a dietitian. And I'm looking at hundreds on type 2 diabetes, on traumatic brain injury. And now we have them on schizophrenia and eating disorders. And so, yeah, I was like, well, I initially thought, oh, I'm going to bring all this to my hospital director. They're going to be so excited, and they're going to want to teach this in the clinic. And of course, as you can imagine, that was not the case. And so, yeah, I ended up leaving the hospital setting not too much longer after that. And went from making a decent salary to absolutely nothing for several years.
That's crazy. I mean, that you felt, well, not felt, you were rejected. You were totally rejected, even though you had the science.
Oh, yeah, you can lose your license. They're like, you can't teach this here.
Yeah, that's crazy and scary, because you did all the things. You crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's to get your certification, and then you happen upon this other information that wasn't included in your education. And I mean, I'm really curious, the director, whoever, you talked to about this, were they even willing to read the studies that you had presented? They didn't
No.
even want to read it, even though
No, they
this.
said, hey, because they said our insurance reimbursement, our hospital policy depends on us following these guidelines. Like, because it's the federal guidelines. If somebody followed like what you said, and they can follow the federal guidelines and die, and it's fine, because that's what the insurance signed off. If they follow what you said, and they die, then we can get sued. So that was kind of, I mean, that's the paraphrase version of it. But yeah, they weren't even willing to look at it.
I mean, that feels heartbreaking, just to hear your story of always trying to do the right thing, and then learning that some of the right things you were doing were not helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I
primarily for
wrote the book,
yourself.
The Dietitian's Dilemma. Like, what do you do? Like, all of a sudden, when you don't know what you don't know. If you truly believe these whole grains are helping people and you're advocating, but once I knew, it wasn't that I just wasn't not helping people. This advice was hurting people. And so it's like I was asked to continue to give advice that was literally hurting people. And that was an ethical dilemma. And I have dietitians reach out to me all the time and are like, what do I do? Because I need this job. I need this insurance. I need this paycheck. And I mean, I was there too. I was like, what do I do? And so it was like, how do I figure it out? And financially, you sit down with your partner and say, hey, when can I leave? And, I was 36. I took a manual labor job. Like, oh my God, I'm going to go back to hustling, while I write the book. And it was a rough few years, my tax returns show wasn't particularly fruitful, but, I'm very grateful that I was able to do that and able to hopefully be part of the paradigm shift.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about your book, The Dietitian's Dilemma.
Yeah, so I wanted to write about disease states where, one, I'd see it in the hospital setting. I felt like I had a really good firsthand experience on, and also that we really had the studies on. There's 151 cited articles and things that I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about. So, I share my personal story, and then I talk about diabetes, mental health disorders, including anxiety disorder, major depression. There's a whole chapter on eating disorders, which is very controversial. I get people emailing me all the time, or not all the time, but dietitians, oh, you have to eat all foods in moderation. We know that's not working for most people. There's a chapter on sarcopenia, heart disease, plants versus animals, discussing bioavailability. People have been curious about my running, so I put a chapter on, fat oxidation and low carb running. And yeah, just there's a chapter on getting started as well.
Oh, that's great. Wow, there's so much information, and it sounds like that book would be really helpful for just everyday folks, who might be struggling with something and they are doing everything right, like you were,
Yeah.
and can sort of learn from your experience and be supported and affirmed that it's okay if you don't feel right doing all the right things.
It's a different way to look at things, right? Like I wanted it to be very readable too. Like you and I were talking a little bit offline. There's so many great clinical trials, and I'm a super science nerd, but I wanted anybody, if you don't know anything about science, to be able to pick it up and just, there's testimonies, there's stories, just to be like, oh my gosh, this makes sense, So that was the goal, and just that people would come away from it being like, well, of course, like this is why I'm not feeling well, and this is what I can do about it. I attended a new employee orientation once, and then I'll never forget, the woman told me, if somebody has a disease, if they have type 2 diabetes, if they're obese, if they're, they have an eating disorder, they're in a crisis. Nobody says, I'm in a crisis, challenge me, right? It's like, I'm in a crisis, make this as simple as possible. And we have made nutrition way too complicated. And so I wanted to give people a very simple prescription. It's not easy, because our modern food environment is not set up for us to succeed. There's sugar and flour and crappy food everywhere, and people are giving you terrible advice, but it is simple.
Yeah. I do the same thing as a trainer and a coach. I try and break it down real simple. I hope that one of the things that I do talk about a lot with my clients is the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor, because when I present some of this information, they're like, I don't know about that. Saturated fat is bad. There's all these studies. And I say, tell you what, don't believe anything I say. Get a CGM. Wear it for 2 weeks. Eat whatever you want and watch. And then you will know. And your body might be different than mine. I'm not saying that you're going to turn out, with the same results or same blood glucose responses as me if I eat this and you eat that. But you have to learn for yourself what works and what doesn't work. And I'm so grateful that we have those now. It's not always easy to get, but they're becoming much more affordable. And, with technology, you can sync it with your phone. And so you're constantly getting fed updates on your blood glucose at all hours of the day. And that's kind of where I end when I have my spiel, or if I'm doing a presentation. I say, okay, if you don't believe anything I said, or you're critical of what I'm saying, that's totally fine. Just get a CGM. And so I'm curious, do you recommend CGMs to your patients?
No, not generally, but I like them. I think they're great. We did some of the patients I work with at Owna Health were in a study where they had CGMs, and the feedback, there's nothing like feedback in real time, right? Like one of our people in the study was like, oh my God, I ate a piece of pizza and it went through the roof. Right. But yeah, no, it's not a tool that I, tell people they have to have or need to have, but I think they're fantastic if somebody wants to get that.
Yeah. So now that you have your own clientele or patients, what's your practice? How is it set up since you're no longer working in an institutional setting that I know of? Maybe share a little bit about how you get clients or patients, and how do you approach the nuances of nutrition?
Yeah, so I've actually now worked with Dr. Mariela Glandt at Owna Health, which is very similar to Verta Health. And I also continue to see a few of my clients. I'm not taking new clients right now, but I see some young women with eating disorders that see me on a consistent basis. And so, yeah, so for Owna Health, it's super simple. We have a 2-page flyer: eat this, don't eat that, which, like I was saying, just, and a lot of these people too are struggling financially, struggling with all kinds of health issues. And so our goal is to get them off medication. Dr. Mariela, the endocrinologist, get you off insulin. Let's get you off all these drugs. And obviously you may still have to take some. And then we just, put them on a very low carbohydrate diet. They focus on protein, fat, and fiber. And they see me, they see the dietitian, but then every day on the app, they get to message me. This is what I ate. So we can, every day they get that feedback. And, with people who adhere to it, it's amazing the results we've had. I had a guy, his A1C was over 13, and in less than 6 months, it was 5.4. It's just taking those carbohydrates out. So, yeah, once again, we keep it super duper simple. Obviously, with my eating disorder clients, it's very nuanced depending if they need to, gain weight, stabilize, whatever. But we generally follow not a ketogenic, but a lower carbohydrate, animal forward diet. I found that really helps stabilize blood glucose. I had a young lady who was 13. She couldn't even sit still on our call. She couldn't even make eye contact. It was so, because she was just so doped up on sugar. Her dietitian, this poor kid is 13 and, barely 90 pounds, and and so it was amazing that she was like a different kid. The next month I saw her, and we didn't eliminate carbohydrates, but we just massively upped fat and protein, and really easy tiger. You don't need to be having double things of ice cream and 20 bowls of frosted mini wheats first thing in the morning. Slight hyperbole, but not much. So yeah, so that's kind of how I work.
So what about calories? Because that seems to be something that's still very controversial. And if you're telling folks to not eat as many carbohydrates and to up their fat, the fat has more calories in it. So people might be turned off by that. How do you address that concern with your patients?
Yeah, when you stay turned off, what do you mean?
Well, let's say it's someone who doesn't want to gain weight.
Okay.
They want to lose weight or stay where they are. And so I'll give you an example. someone I know has been through several programs, support programs for diet and health, and they have always been taught to count calories. If you want change and if you want good results, you just have to count your calories, and that's all you have to really do. Everything in moderation. One thing I've said on this podcast several times is I don't use the M word with my clients because it's subjective and it's not helpful at all. And it's not simple. It becomes kind of complex if you just say everything in moderation. So does calorie counting come up as a concern with your patients or clients? And how do you respond? Because eating more fat and protein can be intimidating to people if they are coming from this narrative of like counting calories.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And what I like to do is I like to show, I've got like a couple slides, but showing people how the different macronutrients impact blood glucose is huge, right? I show them carbohydrates makes blood glucose goes way high. Protein is very small. Fat is like this. And I say, our goal is to get insulin down. And then I show them this graph that shows fatty acid oxidation. You get just a little insulin on board and fat, it doesn't like go like this. It like falls off a cliff. And so it's like, we got to stop, calories, throw that shit out the window, and I say that, but with some of my eating disorder clients, we have like minimum standards we're trying to hit, but that's kind of a different when you're trying to gain weight. But if you're trying to lose weight, we just need to get insulin low. Let's do that. That is our main goal. I want you to be satiated and we're getting insulin low. And what I find is when people eat really protein forward, I had a bunch of beef, I had a bunch of eggs, I had a bunch of chicken, I had some avocado, they tend to feel better. And that's like goal number one. I'm not hungry. I feel better. I have a little bit more energy. And then over time, that just keeping insulin low, we're going to start to see some because their body can finally oxidize their own body fat for fuel. So I think just explaining it to people, like, let's stop thinking about calories. Like we've got people so wrapped up in, numbers and calories where I've seen people gain weight on 1,500 calories and lose weight, the same person on 2,000. It's insulin. We've got to get your insulin lower.
Speaking of insulin, that's something that comes up a lot with my clients. Well, I bring it up honestly because their doctors don't. And so are you able to request labs for an insulin test for your patients? Yeah. And okay, you can, and you do. How often and what signs bring you to that point where you say, you know what, let's check your insulin levels?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate, when they come into Owna Health, they're generally having that fasting insulin done. And I've had people with a normal A1C and an off-the-chart fasting insulin. I have one lady with 60. Holy cow, poor thing, the highest I've ever seen. But yeah, and one thing, like I can't as a dietitian request labs for it to be covered by their insurance. It's not like, like they're gonna have to go and get it outside, But now we know there's plenty of places you can go and get them done for, $20-$30. So, I would say, when would I request labs? I mean, I think it's a good thing to have in general, just getting a basic CBC, which is going to have your blood glucose and A1C, but you're going to have to request fasting insulin. That's not going to be in a normal panel. But if anybody, I mean, certainly if you're dealing with obesity, if you're dealing with fatigue, if you're dealing with, if you've had a history of any type of hypothyroidism, I mean, it's never a bad thing to have though, just to have that kind of starting point.
Yeah. Great. That's good to know because I'm all about fasting insulin tests. I think it can be very helpful. So I want to get into the role that you play with American Diabetes Society. And so if you could share what it is and what it isn't and how you got involved, and we can go on.
Yeah. So the American Diabetes Society, we are the opposite of the American Diabetes Association. And the American Diabetes Association, their actually stance on nutrition is they don't have any stance on nutrition. Like they say, we don't support any one meal plan. It's individualized, which at the American Diabetes Society, the science says that we can reverse type 2 diabetes with a therapeutic carbohydrate restricted diet. So that's what we recommend. We've got a great website. It's a 501c3. So it's a nonprofit. None of us are making any money. It's all volunteer. But it's myself, I'm the head dietitian. Dr. Kinberry actually approached me and said, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to help advocate this? Because we've just seen it. So it's Kinberry, Eric Westman, Ben Bickman, Tony Hampton, And Mariela Glandt are the doctors. The dietitians are myself, Shannon Davis, Temple Stewart, and Shanna Husson. All these, we've seen the power of low carbohydrate nutrition. We've seen the science behind low carbohydrate nutrition specifically for type 2 diabetes. So the American Diabetes Association has high carb recipes, is heavily sponsored by Pfizer, and it seems like a conflict of interest to be sponsored by companies that make diabetic drugs. So we're not that. And so our goal initially is we want to give people, once again, that very simple information, meal plans, recipes. And this is our first year. Our goal, we're going to have a fundraiser in the fall so we can do more advocacy. We can go to conferences. We can, reach professionals. Because a lot of doctors, a lot of dietitians do not understand that type 2 diabetes is reversible. So that's our message and that's our goal.
Great. Yeah, I follow you guys on Instagram, and I didn't know that they would refer me to you because I messaged the message place, right? And I said, hey, can you guys come on my podcast? And I don't know who to talk to. I know Tony personally. He's been on our podcast before.
Cool.
But I just didn't know who was like the representative or whatever. And so, yeah, they pointed me to you, which is amazing because I haven't had a dietitian on the podcast yet. And I've seen you speak, and I think you're fabulous. So
thank you.
I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing with American Diabetes Society, because I would love to support you with the fundraiser in the fall and share any information so more people follow you and understand the good science and, continue to transform people's health. So what's next? How do you see yourself maybe in a year? What do you see as the future of nutrition in this context?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think professionally, I'm really excited to continue to grow with Owna Health. It's a newer company, and I love the idea of reaching more people with type 2 diabetes. And my hope too is that as we continue to be successful, that this is a model that can just go everywhere. Like, why not be able to get people off medication? And, I always thought, like, if we're going to transform people's health, we're going to have to monetize this. So why not be able to go to insurance companies and say, hey, you're paying this much for someone with type 2 diabetes. We're going to save you a lot of money, get them off meds. That's kind of what, and the insurance is like, sweet, sign us in. And so we actually teach people the right way. And then you have the ripple effect, right? Then they get to teach more people. So I'm really excited about that. And as far as, I guess personally, I have a 6-hour race, June 7th. I'm planning on doing another 50-miler in the fall and then tackling the 100-mile next year. So gonna keep advocating low carb, keep running a lot, and just, keep being grateful for my health and opportunities.
Wow. Well, congratulations on your process, your progress. All the things that you're doing are just really inspiring. And I'm so glad that we got to have this one-on-one conversation, because I'm sure there's lots of questions I didn't ask you that I wanted to ask, but
that's okay.
So we'll stay in touch. And what's the best way for viewers to support your work, follow you on social media, get in touch, however?
Yeah, I mean, always honored if people want to check out the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, or The Fox Family Food Fight. Those are both on Amazon. If you have questions, you can reach out to me through my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net. Also, I'm on Instagram at Run Eat Meat Repeat. I answer all DMs personally, and on X at Michelle Hearn RD.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This was such a treat, and I hope to see you in person in the future at another conference, or maybe we'll be collaborating for American Diabetes Society purposes. So
I love that. I hope so.
Yeah, I'll be in touch, and enjoy your day, and thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, folks, there you have it, episode 12, The Magic of Metabolic Health. Thank you for being part of our village. And if you have questions for Michelle or for me, or you have ideas for another episode, comment below. Please get in touch. We really are here to help you be better, to be, as Dr. Tony Hampton likes to say, your best self. So stay in touch, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
We're bringing healthy back. Them other bros don't know about the facts.